section of the book which is dealing with minor wars. And of course, there's been an incredible number, as you know only too well, of minor wars since the last major war, one after the other. In fact, the world's never been without a minor war of some sort, probably several minor wars going on in one place or another. And the problem has always been, of course, that the superpowers always dabbled in one way or another in those wars, and in a way aggravated through doing that the whole situation. And of course, they had their reasons for doing that. Again, it's usually in terms of a superpower to maintain their domination over that particular area or whatever, that they dabble in these local wars. And this is, again, a problem that's been going on and on and on. Even if you go back again to our own times as a superpower, we maintained our domination over various parts of the world that were important to us through getting involved often in minor wars in order to keep the peace or in order to exploit it in some way or another. This is inevitable when people are in a situation of domination over others, I think, isn't it? And of course, there is this tendency to view points that are strategically important and get involved in one way or another in the local circumstances of that particular place, or to seize it. So in terms of our own history, places like Malta, Cyprus, Aden, the Suez Canal, of course, and Gibraltar were all strategic points that it was important for us to maintain a grip on if we were going to protect our power system in whatever part of the world it was. And even in India, as I said, this was also had its strategic importance in terms of the Russian desire to have that port on the southern seas, on the Indian Ocean. So this is an old problem, but it still goes on. And of course, it means that the people of those who are involved in those smaller wars do not have the power to be able to sort themselves out, to sort it out for themselves. One excuse or another, the superpower steps in and takes charge of one side or another. So we've seen so much of it, haven't we? Palestine, the Israel problem, Lebanon, Nicaragua, Cambodia, not quite in chronological order these, North and South Korea, Afghanistan, and now just recently Panama. It looks like the same old game is going to be played there, doesn't it? And it goes on and on and on. So how to cope with that? The authors both insist that we have to support the United Nations. It comes up again. This is the only existing nucleus upon which a world government can be established. It has so many faults, but we have to protect it. And the tragedy is, of course, that it's not being protected. It's really running itself on a shoestring in terms of money and in terms, for instance, of this country. There's very little opinion for the United Nations. And I felt when we went and offered an evening of Alice to the United Nations, their reaction was in a way so sad. Of course, they were glad that we were going to contribute the money from one of those evenings to United Nations causes. But what made me sad was their almost, in a way, sort of pathetic emotion at actually finding a group of people who wanted to support them. That was what they talked about all the time, that we should give up that evening for the sake of the United Nations. And this, for a world government, what is supposed to be a world unifying force, is very sad, isn't it? Of course, there are other countries in the world who do support the United Nations strongly, but that doesn't apply to this country in a general sense. So we have to find ways in the future to support and promote the United Nations more and more. I feel Sensei is so right in taking that stance. We have to, because it's the one organization that exists. So how to build it and construct it and develop it, I don't see any other way except, in the end, the will and determination of ordinary people. Governments, national governments, are too preoccupied with all their problems. They want still to settle the things their way and to have, their power to do so. The only thing in the end that is going to build the United Nations is people themselves insisting on it, because it's got to come. All these things like inspections of nuclear power for peaceful use, world policing, which we'll talk about in a moment, all these things come from the United Nations. We've got to face this point. We've got to make it better, basically. And I don't think anything will make it better until the people decide to do so. When I say the people, I mean the people of the world to an increasing degree. It's people, after all, that make nations great, isn't it? Without the people, no nation can be great. No government can stay in power in the end if the people are against it, even with a dictator. The Italians showed that when they finally found the means to overcome the dictatorship of Mussolini. So the people have to do it, really. And I feel this is the message, we've got to get across whenever we get a chance to an increasing degree in the coming years, don't you think? It's a big problem. But in the end, that's what the SGI movement is all about. Getting people to use their power individually in order to bring about this change. This is what the cosmic movement is. As I said earlier, when I was talking about each individual working on their own path of life or sphere of action, it's the people that do it. But to do it, people need power, or they at least need to be supported by human power, which, of course, this practice can give to human beings, a power that can be sustained, not a one-off bit of power and then everything collapses, but something like the waves that goes on battering away, battering away, battering away until the change actually occurs. So this is why Sensei is so strongly now moving into this new phase of people relating with each other through the cultural movement in all these various ways. This is the key point, that people right across the globe get to know each other more and more in all sorts of different fields of society. And through getting to know each other, they develop a friendship. And just like our old motto says, through the friendship, it breeds trust. And from that trust can come peace. Because the people, not just in this country or in other countries of Europe, but in countries all over the world, are expressing their desire for peace and are refusing to countenance politicians who won't aim towards that. That it should be the ultimate aim of everyone. So that is what this human movement is all about in the end. So, for example, there is going to be a great exhibition of Japanese treasures. These are from the Fuji Art Museum. They're fabulous treasures. that have been collected, and deliberately they have not had them registered as a national treasure in Japan, because if they do that, it'll be very difficult to get the government to agree to let them out of the country. So they've created this group of 100 fantastic treasures, works of art. They'll be in an exhibition to begin with in Paris in July this year, and then they'll come to us. And I hope by next year we'll have this exhibition in possibly the National Gallery or one of the great museums. I'm not sure yet. But the point is then, through those treasures, you can establish new contacts, new friends, new acquaintances in that particular field. In other words, amongst people who either deal in or like works of art, objects of art. Not everybody likes it, but it's one area in which you can begin to spread contact, human contact. And in the process, of course, you can spread an understanding of Buddhism through those human contacts, not by preaching it at the art exhibition, but through the acquaintances, the people you get to know as a result of it. Same thing in other areas. In the performing arts, of course, we've seen ourselves doing it with Alice. But gradually, this interchange, all over the world, in all sorts of various fields, in education, and so on. So this is the only way to this cultural exchange which leads to friendship and trust. Then they move on to talk about self-defense as a nation. And they agree, of course, that inevitably people are bound to maintain forces for self-defense until they can be convinced that there is no need to anymore. It's as simple as that. So up to now, of course, looking at the nuclear situation, you've had this policy of deterrence. But I think it's now becoming generally accepted that deterrence as a nuclear policy no longer exists, because they've reached a point now where up to now they have held a pistol at each other's heads, two superpowers. But now they know it is not a question of who can press the trigger first. Whichever one presses the trigger is going to suffer as much as the one the weapon's aimed at. So deterrence is nonsense. It's always been nonsense. Long ago, Sensei said, how can we ever achieve happiness if we're like in that situation of pointing a pistol at each other's foreheads? But it's even more of a nonsense now, because if someone presses the trigger, everyone goes. So things are changing. That's the important point, isn't it? Things are changing. Even we've seen Reagan and Gorbachev reach an agreement. Okay, it was only a small step, but they've reached an agreement. In Russia, things are changing. It's not just a sham, as some people tried to pretend it was in the newspapers in their cynical, negative way. It's not a sham. They've got to change it in Russia. Why? Because of economic pressures. Basically, they have to do it. They've got to create a more fluid, flexible economy. The communist system up to now hasn't worked. They're actually having to face that fact and devise new ways. So the self-defense still, of course, is a matter of importance. And really, as the authors say, will have to continue to be a matter of importance until there is a world policing system. Because even if we abolish the nuclear weapons, still there's the possibility of conventional war. And that won't be reduced until there is an effective world policing system. So it's interesting what they suggest. As you may know, some policing efforts on the part of the United Nations have really been successful. But by and large, they're in the minority, not in the majority of cases. So their opinion, I think it's an interesting one, is that the problem is that the United Nations relies on nations, individual nations, to supply the forces for their police force. So inevitably then, national policies, nationalistic policies get all mixed up with it. It's not pure. So there they say, and how right it must be, that the United Nations must create their own, recruit their own policing force, not through nations agreeing to give them a regiment or whatever it may be, or a brigade. They must create their own world police force and use it under, of course, the control of the committees of the United Nations. So in every sense, the United Nations is the nucleus of all these possibilities, though at the moment none of them have actually appeared in a very effective way. But I think the important point is that we recognize now that the time is right. Definitely something is changing. Yes, since this book was written, some things have got worse. For example, people are developing nuclear power for peaceful uses all over the world, with all the danger that involves. But at the same time, the very existence of more and more powerful nuclear weapons makes them impossible to use, and therefore destroys the policy of deterrence. It can no longer be argued effectively. Therefore, something else, some other way has got to be found. And I'm sure that, combined with the economic pressures, is what's brought Reagan and Gorbachev to actually meet and talk, which is the most important point of all. The time is right. Also because human beings everywhere in the world are having to face certain other threats. One is the destruction of the environment. This is a world matter, isn't it? And the second one is the exhaustion of raw materials, which I touched on earlier. This is a fact affecting many, many, many nations, if not all nations. And also, though perhaps people don't recognize it yet, the 3 calamities and 7 disasters are occurring to an increasing degree, until in the end, people won't be able to ignore them. People will start saying, why are we suffering? Just the same as in Nichiren Daishonin's time. People were saying in Japan, why are we suffering like this? So in many ways, these disasters could lead to good. And that, of course, is what Buddhism says, that the greatest evil is always followed by the greatest good. So there is a turning point ahead. The important point is that human beings seize it. And that's really what our movement is all about, to make people more and more aware of the existence of the gods, and to make them understand more and more the profound principles of Buddhism, which enable people to open their eyes and realize the reason why all this is happening, why the world is suffering as it is, why disasters are becoming more, why human beings continue to destroy the environment and all the rest of it. So the more that understanding can spread, the more surely we can grasp this turning point when it occurs and use it. And it's really interesting that this exactly, time-wise, relates to the beginning of the 21st century, and that famous year 2000 and 2001, which people have been talking about for some time now, a sort of intuitive feeling that the world's got to get itself at least sorted out more by then. And this is what the movement for Kosen Rufu is doing. So we shall see definitely in the coming years tremendous acceleration in our involvement as a movement with all aspects of society. pushing outwards more and more and more, so that people become more and more aware of the existence of Nichiren Buddhism. Definitely, we live in very exciting times, incredible times. So whatever field you are in or you're considering moving into, I'm sure it's the right one. If it's come from your Daimoku, which I know all of you will have chanted about it, it's going to be the right one, where you can each have a tremendous influence in the future, because you're the ones. You have to make the future, together with people of your age all over the world. So one's awareness of one's mission in that respect is very important, isn't it? But it may feel very awesome and daunting. What can I do, in my small way, in whatever I'm in, particularly, whether it's as a teacher, like Goff there with his company growing indoor plants or whatever it may be. How can I have this profound effect as an individual? And the answer actually is very simple. The answer is Ichinen combined with Daimoku. You don't know any more than I know, if I'm still going strong, what I can do in 5 years or 10 years' time to help this movement. Nor do you. But if your Ichinen is an absolute determination to achieve peace, or to contribute to the achievement of peace, then if that's in your Ichinen, the Gohonzon will show you how. One can't work it out in one's head, but you must have the Ichinen to create a great future. And of course, Gongyo, and the final prayer of Gongyo, is the important prayer in that respect. You all know it. Lastly, I pray for the Gohonzon's impartial benefits to spread throughout the world and bring peace and happiness to all mankind in the entire universe. Do you relate this to yourself? That's the point. To what you're going to do to make sure that the Gohonzon impartial benefits are spread throughout the world and bring peace and happiness to all mankind in the entire universe. So probably, in lots of cases, when we get to the end of Gongyo, about there, we're already feeling for the candle snuffer, and we're looking at our watches for whatever it is we're going to do next. But Sensei, what made me think very much about this, about 2 years ago, just almost in an aside during a guidance, he said, ever since I started to practice this Buddhism, I've always, in Gongyo, prayed for 2 things. One was that the rice harvest should never fail, because, of course, that's the staple diet of all people in the East. And secondly, that there would be no Third World War. And that moved me very much. I thought to myself, well, what are you doing, Dick Corst, in such a broad way concerning the happiness and prosperity of the people in your part of the world? What are you doing? And of course, what was Sensei saying? He's not doing anything personally to make sure, in a physical sense, to make sure that the rice harvest doesn't fail. But if he chants in that way, and if that is refreshed in his Ichinen twice a day, the Gohonzon will show him what he has to do to bring about the safety of the rice harvest and to ensure that the Third World War doesn't occur. And the same can apply to every single one of you. This is your task. That is why Gongyo is framed like it is. That is why it's the last prayer. Not something to gloss over as you stretch the candle snuffer. So, what is one concerned about? That when Sensei said that, it shook me. I wasn't paying enough attention to that last prayer. So ever since then, I have prayed always in that prayer, as I did Sancho at the end of it, for peace in Northern Ireland and for no Third World War. And I often add in peace in the Middle East, because it's such a danger zone. So now, every day, 365 days, twice a day, twice by 10, 26, 12, 13, 730, our mathematician sitting here, 730 times in a year, I pray like that. So please do it. You cannot work out what you're going to do, but you will discover it, because that's like one's individual prayers concerning one's individual life. If one's Ichinen is towards something, the way to achieve it will just flow from your life. You'll discover. You will go the right way and do the right things and meet the right people and take the right jobs to bring that about. So I really, from this day, ask you to have such a concern over that fifth prayer of Gongyo. Because in a way, it rounds everything off, doesn't it? And of course, more and more then, one begins to get excited to realize that you have a place in this world that is extraordinarily important. You may not be ever in the limelight. Some of you may, some of you may not. Doesn't matter what it is you're doing. You may not want to be, at the top of anything. It's not necessarily the happiness of everybody. But in your own way, at your own chosen level, and on your own path, you will make the causes to achieve a peaceful world in the future. That's the point. And I really feel this, this message must be understood by the New Century Group. If it's not understood by the New Century Group, it'll never be understood by others in the future. You have to also bring up people far into the future who have that incredible spirit and determination, isn't it? The nature of the future of war. I lost where I got to. The nature and future of war. So the nature of war, in discussing it, is very interesting, because what they point out, these two incredible men, comes back to that point of us all being slaves chained to this karma. Because in fact, the soldiers, the people who are actually doing the fighting and the killing, they don't actually bear any personal animosity towards each other at all. In World War I, which, as you know, was unbelievably ghastly war, first Christmas, when they were in trenches opposite each other, the Germans and the British, on Christmas Day, they just put down their weapons, got up out of their trenches and went into no man's land, carrying bottles of champagne and wine and all the rest of it, and had a toast and patted each other on the back and sang songs. That's how much animosity there was between the actual soldiers. And I was really interested talking not long ago with an artist. He was a painter, and he'd been commissioned. He's a very fine artist, but he'd been commissioned by a particular regiment. I can't remember which one, to paint a series of pictures of the various great events in that regiment's history. And in his studio, there were 5 in all, 3 of past history, and 2 were about the Falklands War. And of course, the past ones were full of blood and glory. Typical, event. I can't remember what particular incidents, but anyway, typical of that era in a way. People's imaginations, forget the misery and the ghastliness of it all. It all has a sort of heroic feature to it. But then it came to the 2 Falklands one, and one of them was of a particular corporal who had won the Victoria Cross in the Falkland Islands. And he'd won it because single-handed he'd held up a whole enemy position, which enabled the rest of his particular company or platoon or whatever it was to get out of a jam they'd got into it, avoid being slaughtered themselves, and live to see another day. Anyway, this portrait was of him actually challenging these people and firing first shots from his gun on one of the Argentinians in a trench. And what struck me about it was the corporal's face. The expression was incredible. It was as if he was saying, as he was firing his machine gun, it was as if he was saying, what the hell am I doing this? Why have I got to do this? There was no hate, no sign of anger, just anguish, really, as he was standing there firing his submachine gun at these people. And I asked this artist about this, and he told me how he'd been attached to this regiment because he wanted to understand the military. He'd had no experience of them before. So he went and lived with this regiment while they were on maneuvers in Germany. And of course, he said what struck him was how completely removed, in a way, these soldiers, professional soldiers, were from the actual act of killing. They never really dwelt on that one. Their view was policing, keeping the peace, just by their existence, preventing war. They trained to kill, but in their minds, they never actually visualized the act of killing. And I could relate to that completely, because having been 20 years in the army myself, you don't think about it. When I joined the army, I never thought about killing. It was the last thing I thought about. What I thought about was, having the chance to travel around the world, goes to interesting countries, bit of danger here and there, wearing wonderful uniforms that attracted the girls, and all that. That was what appealed to me, the glamour, not killing. So when World War II, started to approach, I was absolutely scared to bits. And so were most other people, my friends and so on. None of them ever thought about the actual act of having to kill, or worse still, being killed yourself. There was no animosity. I couldn't hate a German or hate a Japanese. I think some people who were actually tortured by the Japanese probably had hatred. I can understand that. But in a general sense, I couldn't. I had many talks with Italian prisoners of war and Japanese prisoners of war. I enjoyed talking. They talked to me about their wives and children, their families. I was moved by it. They were human beings. So this is an extraordinary thing, you see. It comes back to the Gosho and its correctness that one is a slave. You don't think about killing, but somehow your karma draws you into it. And there you are, captured, a slave, having to wage war and kill, but actually bearing no animosity for those you are killing. Crazy, isn't it? But then Toynbee points out that this is a human disease, that it hasn't always existed. And he goes back to that point of 5,000 years ago, when it seems organized war in what you could call an organized, united manner began to be waged by human beings. Never existed before. Yes, one human being might kill another, murder through hate or whatever, but not organized war. Animals, too, they refer to. Animals don't kill unless they have to do so in order to survive and eat. Animals who fight over their woman or over a woman, a female animal, never kill each other. One will win the battle, which is a trial of strength, and the other one goes away and leaves the female to the one who's won. It's not a natural thing in life to kill on a mass scale, but that is what war is all about. So it's not only either the soldiers who are the slaves. It's not only men who carry the karma of war, but women also. Women in the past encouraged their men to go to war. For whatever reason, maybe they were frightened, feared attack. They felt that, their nest needed defending, but women also are involved in it. So women also suffered through war. This is aside from the fact that in terms of eternal life, we don't necessarily always born into the same sex, but women suffer too. Women through war are deprived of their husbands or fathers or their children. They see their children killed or maimed. They have to live in a situation where there's not enough food, maybe, strict rationing. They can't feed their children as they would like to feed them. They're called in, to work on munitions, build aeroplanes, whatever's necessary for the war effort. They can't buy the clothing that they like to buy. It's a minor suffering compared with the other ones, but nevertheless, women suffer. And of course, in recent times, women actually go to war. They actually go to war in the front line in some of these, especially these minor wars. They slaughter and kill just like the men do. It's a disease. Now they've caught it in every way. But whatever happened, even before they caught the disease of doing the killing themselves, still they were involved in the karma of war. And of course, on top of that, everyone suffers in terms of aerial bombing, rockets, all the other inventions that can make a night's sleep often impossible. So it's an entire nation. No one is spared now. The causes and effects that have been built up over the centuries have been so great that in the end we've reached that point where everyone in a whole country is affected if they wage war. It's not also just a physical disease, but it's also a spiritual disease. The worst effects of war are spiritual. In terms of course, stress, but not just stress, in terms of distortion of the spirit, distortion of beliefs, distortion of moral values. All things like that happen in a very subtle, cunning way through the work of the devilish force of life in the process of making war. It undermines all the values, cuts away all respect, if you like. It's not just the killing, but that is the worst and the most lasting effect. So people sometimes say, my father won't ever talk about the war. No, probably he doesn't want to. It's too painful for him. Maybe it's painful for him because of the way he behaved. If you read those incredible books called Cries for Peace, I think it is, which the Youth Division in Japan published, of actual experiences of men and women in war, You can understand a man might have that feeling. I feel some of those men were so courageous to completely and honestly state in their experiences how they behaved in war, the incredible, animalistic, ghastly way they behaved. But that is war, that it has that effect on people. So it's understandable that fathers won't talk to their sons about war. My father would never talk to me about war. I don't know why. I haven't the slightest idea, but I think it was because of what he saw and what he had to do, and it was such a painful memory that he couldn't speak about it. So he had all his old, when I was a boy, World War I equipment, revolvers and all sorts of things in a drawer. And I was always, just like any small boy, asking to see them and to tell me about them. But he used to get furious with me and refuse. He was incredibly upset when I went into the army in my own, really, in a way, stupid, boyish way. But there you are. I think we don't know half the time what these people went through. So it's understandable. It's a sense of utter shame most of the time. War is disgusting. That I promise you. So there we are. We've reached this point today. We have to change things. I hope lots of you will go into all sorts of different fields, moving gradually as you go forward till you reach your 30s. You find the final path that you're going to follow. And there you bring to bear the wisdom of the Kwanzaa and change things. We spend vast sums of money on defense. Our whole economy is in a state of imbalance because of it. That is why we can't give enough to education. We can't give enough to pay the nurses. We can't give massive help to the third world because of that. It's not any politician's fault, actually. In the end, it's too great for any politician to cope with. The pressures are there. And now Israel has its own nuclear bomb. Where is that going to end? How long before Gaddafi has it? How long before this little country and that little country has it? There's no time to waste. There really isn't. But the great thing is that we've got members all over the world who are concerned and considering it in just the way we are today. So I've talked enough. It's sort of awesome, but will you please not feel awesome about it, but come back to that incredible fifth prayer. That is how we win the future. Don't worry about what you have to do. Just express that prayer every gongyo with great Ichinen and a determination to do and fulfill your mission and purpose, whatever that may be. And what you have to do, as I said, will just flow. It'll just come to you, and you'll do it, I know. Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.